Hello everybody, today's review is a rather unusual one. To begin with, let's play a small guessing game, shall we? This is a black on black Mercedes E63. Now, what sort of things would you expect to find in the boot of such a vehicle? Perhaps a nice big briefcase, maybe a stack of money, perhaps half a kilo of Colombia's finest produce. The one thing I bet you wouldn't expect to find in there is a wheelchair. And that's what makes today's review so unusual. You see, this car is a 2015 5.5 litre bi-turbo Mercedes E63 AMG on hand controls. I have never driven a car on hand controls before, and it's interesting to say the least. And so I am going to do my best to sort of review this car, and it is going to be a sort of review because I think what's more interesting to talk about is just how the car works on the hand controls. Now, the mechanism is rather simple. A series of cables and rods are attached to the pedals, and you operate it all off this one lever here just under the steering column. Operating such a setup does take a little bit of getting used to. Now, you might be sat there thinking, well, all you got to do, James, is just pull and push a lever. It's not really that complicated, is it? Well, the thing is, when you get into a car, your brain has this idea of how a car works, because I don't know about you, but every single car I've ever got into in my life, with pretty much one exception, has been operated the same way. And then you get in something which is just slightly different, and you really do have to concentrate quite hard on it. Now, for those interested in the sort of realities of trying to run an interesting car with a disability, we're going to be doing another video looking at this owner and his other vehicle tomorrow. And that'll be talking not just about the other car, which is his main vehicle, but also some of the things that he has to consider when he's looking to purchase a car and all that stuff. There are a few things that I thought would be problems which aren't, and also I'm sure vice versa as well. So on to the car. The E63 started life with the amazing 6.2 litre V8 that I absolutely love to pieces, and I've reviewed an estate that was equipped with that engine. It then changed to this, the 5.5 litre bi-turbo. To begin with, the car officially had basically the same power as the outgoing engine, but as you might imagine, with a lot more torque at no RPM. Later on in life, this car got another little bit of power, about 25 or 30 extra ponies, but I think it's fair to say that this engine is relatively under-stressed. Now, you may think that this is not the obvious choice at all for a petrolhead who has practical considerations at the front of their mind, and that is very true. This certainly was a surprise purchase even to its owner. He initially was looking at getting a Golf R or a BMW M140i, and then he realised that these could be had for an utter song. He chatted to a few people who said, well, if you buy wisely and a little bit of luck is involved, they can actually be run for a relatively reasonable budget. They are still going to cost more than running, say, a Golf R or an M140, and if things break, it will cost more, and consumables are more expensive, and it does drink more fuel. But because this is a second car, it doesn't do too many miles, and the owner's had it now for just under a year, and it has so far been trouble-free. The MCT is an unusual transmission indeed. The guts of it are essentially the same as the earlier 7-speed automatic box that Mercedes used. However, there is no torque converter on it. Instead, it has a wet clutch setup. It shifts a lot faster than the old version. However, it is a little bit on the brittle side. I have known a few people to have cars with this transmission in that have then had to have them replaced, repaired, or whatever, because they aren't extremely durable. If you're looking at buying one of these that has been modified, that's something that you're going to want to check out, and make sure you go for a thorough test drive, because sometimes transmission problems don't appear until the car is thoroughly warmed through. What's curious is that when you pull for acceleration, there is some resistance and some weight to it, but when you then go to depress the brakes, there is just a little bit of a dead spot before they work. At very low speeds, when the car is cold, the brakes are extremely grabby, although that is probably going to be me getting used to the hand controls as much as anything. On the topic of brakes, there is something that the owner needs your help with, because this car came equipped from factory, we believe, with these sort of minty green calipers. We believe they are the Petronas green from the AMG Petronas F1 team of the time, but we're not sure if there's something that we'll order from factory or perhaps done by a dealer or what. So we'd really like someone to tell us if that was a special order or if it was a fairly common thing or what, because we simply do not know. What I can tell you is that this car is a very nice place to be. You can tell that it's a step above from a C-Class. For whatever reason, it doesn't feel quite as opulent as the last E-Class that I remember driving. You will get different specifications and things with them, and this one doesn't seem to have, say, the extended leather or anything like that. But for the prices you're paying and the cars you're going to be probably comparing it with, it's a very nice thing indeed. The steering wheel is really nice, and one benefit of Mercedes' obsession with putting every control on one stalk is that if your right hand is busy, no jokes, you at the back, then you can do what you need with the left. That is, if you're used to it. I'm operating the car with the hand control, and yet still my feet are going down and doing stuff. I wondered earlier that I thought earlier that the brakes might have been utterly and completely terrible because I was standing on them really hard and they weren't doing anything. This is when we were just maneuvering for the photos. And then I realised that I was just pressing on the little guard down here, which stops your legs from accidentally pressing one of the pedals. Really annoyingly, and I think almost insultingly, the handbrake setup is still as standard. So you still have to get down there somehow and operate a pedal if you want to put the handbrake on in the car. That seems really unfair. The cost of putting hand controls in is about £650. Now, my first question was, surely there's a way of getting that done on your behalf, and basically that can happen, but if you turn up in an E63 and ask them to give you some free hand controls, they're going to look at you in a slightly funny way. With a little bit of practice, you can actually operate the brakes reasonably smoothly. It's not actually as hideous as one might think. The gearbox is still a little slow, but even here at just over 1100 RPM, it does still have something to give. Once it shifts down a gear or two though, this thing absolutely flies. We are now approaching something of a miracle of the modern age, and something that I am told is quintessentially northern. It's a Greg's drive-through. It is at these low speeds where the hand controls become the most difficult, and that's possibly not so much the hand controls but the car as well, because they are pretty big discs. Unlike the later E-Class, this one was available strictly as two-wheel drive, which means on days like today where the roads are a little bit greasy, brisk getaways can be tricky, but I'm going to do my best to attempt one now. Oh, it does sound nice indeed. So another thing we need some advice on is what exhaust should be fitted to it, because this one currently has the standard system and its owner is considering the Brabus one. However, the Brabus is not a cheap item at all. So if somebody knows something that's just as good but more reasonably priced, we need your help there as well. Today's video is really, as you can probably tell, not really a strict review. It's more a sort of a little look at something a little bit unusual and I think very much worth covering. Steering in this car is not too bad. I actually quite like the way the E-Class is steer, and this car follows my rules of basically the bigger the Merc, the better. Unfortunately, these are not the same roads that I was able to enjoy the last E63 on. Those were of a very different nature, and I have to say, I think it is probably the 6.2, which is my preferred engine, but that is also an engine that really needs you to sort of get on the gears to get the best out of it, and in this scenario, that's just not possible. For the sake of science, we've twisted around to sport mode, and I'm going to see how that changes things. Ah, yes. What sport does is let the car rev out longer and it'll hold the gear for longer too, meaning that the car is then more responsive. So particularly for this style of driving, it does actually make a really big difference. As you would hope from an E-Class, it is very comfortable, very nice place to be, and I can see myself covering quite big distances in it. The boot is also a reasonable size, which of course is quite important, and one thing you can often find with these cars is that the boot of the saloon is not always that much smaller than the estate, because if you want to keep your things covered, well, the estates lose quite a bit of their rear storage space, and let's be honest here, the saloons sometimes do look better, but the E-Class, I'm not actually sure. It's one of the few cars where I think I'm split 50-50 on whether it's the saloon or the estate. It will, with some gentle provocation, spin up quite easily. One thing that Mercedes chose not to fit this car with is a limited slip differential, and I don't know why Mercedes are quite so stingy with handing those out, because so few cars they produce have them as standard, and yet very many of the cars they make really do need them, because when you're putting this much power and torque through just 2 wheels, they need all the help that they can get. That aside though, and taking into account the fact that this is more sort of first drive rather than in-depth review, I actually really like the E63. The hand controls I am getting used to fairly quickly, and it's been an eye-opening experience for sure. I would love those out there watching that also have a car and hand controls that's perhaps a little bit different from what you might expect to drop me a line in the comments below and tell me what it is that you're driving, because I'd love to know. Here it's quite a bit drier than the junction I just pulled away from, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply the same amount of throttle and see how it gets on. Nah. Oh. Even worse apparently, because one of the wheels will grip and the other just skips and hops along. Silly Mercedes. Just give it a slippy diff. Anyway, thanks everyone for watching. Please like, comment below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye bye.